2 hours drive north of Sydney, the New South Wales Hunter Valley region is renowned for its spectacular natural beauty and, perhaps most famously, the seemingly endless array of sprawling wineries that call it home. A popular tourist destination, the Hunter Valley draws more than 2.5 million visitors per year, injecting a massive annual revenue of $350 million into the Australian economy. In recent years, as talk of climate change and global warming heats up, scientists and climate change experts have turned their attention to the Hunter, speculating how changes in temperature might affect the region's booming wine industry. Bruce Tyrrell, owner of the prestigious Tyrrell's Wines, has lived in the Hunter his whole life and comes from a family who has been involved in the wine industry for generations. Despite new evidence from the CSIRO, Bruce remains sceptical about the impacts of climate change.
I suppose it depends how old you are. I'm seeing the seasons now as they were in the late 60s into the 70s. 2008, we didn't pick any reds at all here, and that was identical season to 1971. This year was very much like 1974. So look, I'm somewhat of a sceptic. I find great difficulty in someone can't tell me what the weather's going to do tomorrow, but they're very definite what it's going to do in 100 years' time. And the weather's controlled by sunspots on the phases of the moon, and man has an impact at the fringes. And weather certainly goes in patterns. Two seasons are never the same. And we'll have wet years again and we'll have dry years again, I'm sure. I think perhaps we're having, sometimes man takes themselves too seriously. I think we have an impact on the margin. But it's not, and I'm yet to be proven to me that there is a significant change in the weather. And my lifetime, I've not seen a significant change in the weather. I've seen the patterns. I've seen us go through the wet periods and I've seen us go through the dry periods. I've seen us go through hot summers and cold summers.
Recent data released by the CSIRO stated that a primary factor spurring early ripening of grapes was indeed climate change and global warming. In an analysis of vineyard records over the period 1985 to 2009, it was found that grapes were ripening an average of 8 days earlier per decade, a factor that could potentially reduce the grape wine quality.
Yes, there's no doubt that they're coming on earlier, at least based on this property. In fact, in the Hunter Valley, the traditional date to start picking grapes is the day after Australia Day. That's the 27th of January. That's the traditional sort of date. And you pick white wines first, and then you pick red wines subsequently, right? So normally, it's all over by the end of February or towards the first week or two of March. That's the traditional pattern. Here in the Hunter, in the last 10 years, every year we've seen the whites coming on earlier, right? To such an extent now where our early whites are coming off in the second week of January, right? Now, I don't know if this is a function of global warming or what, but it's what we've observed, right? It's roughly a 2-week difference in 10 years.
Whilst most Hunter Valley winemakers remain unsure about the impact of rising temperatures on viticulture, they are sure about one thing: rain. Peter O'Mara is the owner of smaller boutique winery Adina Vineyard and knows firsthand the devastation of a bad harvest.
What rain does is several things. That first of all, it makes access to the vines difficult, right? That's the first thing. So harvesting it becomes a physical problem. But more importantly, what happens is the grapes are ready to go. The bunches are looking beautiful, everything's ready to go. And you're just waiting for the sugar content to come up. And that requires heat. So if you're getting rain and no heat, you don't get the sugar content, or the bome, as we say, up to the target levels. So that's problem number one. The problem number two is that the roots of the vines think, oh, this is good, all this rain. So they start to suck up the water into the grapes, and the grapes start to bloat. And so they push against each other, and they split, and you get fungal diseases, right? Nasty sort of fungal diseases. So
it's disappointing from your perspective.
No, of course it is.
Yeah.
And everybody got wiped out in 2008, for the same reason, rain. So we didn't pick in 2008. In 2009, some people picked. I chose not to because it was very marginal, again because of rain. So that was 2 out of 2. And then in 2010, we all said to ourselves, well, it couldn't happen 3 years in a row. Well, guess what? It did. So we didn't get a Shiraz off this property for 3 years. And that hurt big time. Right? So it's not only the fact that you run out of a particular variety, but it's also, you know, you take an accounting view of the thing, you've incurred all the costs and you've got no product.
Climate change expert and viticulturalist Brett Keeping, also the owner of Two Rivers Winery, strongly believes in human-induced global warming, but thinks that sensationalised media articles don't represent what's really going on.
Probably 4 years ago, the Hunter Valley Wine Industry Association, which I'm involved in, decided that climate change awareness was a priority for us, and that we needed to do something for our members in the broader Hunter Valley to make them aware of the potential impacts of climate change. So we, in conjunction with Hunter Councils, the University of Newcastle and Macquarie University, conducted a climate change study where we basically looked at the history of climate in the Hunter Valley, and we identified a set of parameters that impact on grape growing. For example, extreme heat events, rainfall at harvest, the winter range between your coolest and hottest temperatures and so on. And this was all put into a study. We looked at all of the available data, all the historical weather data, and then started to develop some trends from that. And it was a fantastic study, a really positive step for the wine industry to just really concisely map our history. And the idea of this study was it made certain predictions leading into the future. When we released this study, which we all had worked so hard on and thought was such a positive thing for the wine industry to be tackling our problems and being aware of all the issues, the press got hold of it and wrote it up as a disaster for the Hunter Valley, and that the climate's going to change, and they really sensationalised the findings. In fact, they didn't. This one newspaper wrote an article without even looking at the study. And I think that's part of the problem with climate change. People are so used to being fed the extreme line on it that they switch off after a while. Whereas the problems we're dealing with are real, and they're gradually happening, and we're concerned about not what's going to happen next year or the year after, or last year or the year before, but in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, where's the Hunter Valley going to be, and what have we got to do to adapt to a changing climate?
But for now, Bruce Tyrrell remains certain that the only person able to control the wine industry is the one above.
Like the CSIRO have said in this study, the reason they've released it and done it is so they can work with vineyards to develop strategies that can help them combat like what they perceive to be impacts of climate change.
You get rain like you did this year for red grapes in this area.
There's not much you can do about it.
The only one's going to fix that's God.